Hi everyone, welcome to the LTM learning series. This is chapter 4. In this chapter, we will explore how LTM operates as a full reverse proxy, focusing on load balancing and security. This video is continuation of chapter 3. Prior to watch this video, I highly recommend watching chapter 3 first, which explains the need for a reverse proxy. Alright, let us get started. Very important point to understand. F5 works as a full reverse proxy. What does full proxy mean? In a full proxy architecture, the client side and server side connections are independent. Big IP acts as a middleman and manages both connections separately. So, as part of the full proxy role, F5 handles two separate connections. One is for client side and another one is for server side. The client side connection is established between the end user and F5, whereas the server side connection is established between the F5 and backend server. Let us deep dive the client side connection flow. The end user connects to F5 to access learning portal. When the end user connects, the client machine completes the TCP three-way handshake with the F5 LTM virtual server. After a successful TCP handshake, the client machine completes the TLS handshake with the F5 LTM virtual server. After a successful TLS handshake, the end user sends the first HTTP request to the F5 LTM virtual server over the established TLS connection. Now, the F5 LTM client-side virtual server receives this HTTP request through the client-side interface. Okay, what is an LTM virtual server? LTM stands for Local Traffic Manager in F5. Virtual server is a listener in LTM and it is configured to listen on TCP or UDP ports and accept the incoming requests. In our case, we have configured an HTTPS listener, which means HTTPS virtual server. Important point to note. So far, the HTTPS virtual server receives the HTTP request. At this stage, there is no connection is created to the backend server. When the LTM virtual server receives the incoming HTTP request, it checks whether the website needs to be protected. What does it check? It checks whether a WAF policy is attached to the virtual server. Okay, what is WAF? WAF stands for Web Application Firewall Module in F5, which protects the web application from the bad actors. If a WAF policy is attached, the request is forwarded to the WAF module for the security inspection. Now, the WAF module receives and inspects the incoming HTTP request and return the verdicts to the LTM. If the WAF blocks the request, then LTM responds to the client with a WAF block page. Also, client connection ends here. If the WAF allows the request, then the LTM virtual server continues processing the traffic further. The traffic is inspected by WAF and found to be legitimate. So, let the F5 proceed creating the server-side connection to serve the web request. Prior to proceed creating the server-side connection, the Big IP LTM checks the backend server pool. Okay, what it checks? It verifies how many pool members are configured. In this, how many of these members are currently available to serve the response? Alright, a question here. How F5 checks the service availability on the pool members? Service availability is checked using an F5 health monitor, which sends health check request from the F5 self IP. So, the configured health monitor continuously checks the availability of the service on the backend web servers at regular intervals. After confirming that the healthy pool members are available in the pool, then the system evaluates the configured load balancing algorithm. Based on the selected load balancing algorithm, a pool member is chosen to handle this request. Once the pool member is selected, the big IP creates a new TCP connection to the backend server. Question here, which IP does F5 use to create the backend connection? This connection is initiated from server-side VLAN self IP. Alright, so F5 will always use the server-side VLAN self IP to establish the backend connection. Is that correct? No. The correct answer is it depends how the system is configured. If there is a single F5 device and the virtual server is configured with SNAT auto map, then F5 uses server-side VLAN self IP to establish the backend connection. If the F5 is in a HA pair and the virtual server is configured with SNAT auto map, then F5 uses server-side floating IP to establish the backend connection. Alternatively, instead of using SNAT auto map in virtual server configuration, you can configure a specific SNAT address. In that case, F5 will use the configured SNAT IP to create the backend connection. In our case, it is a single F5 and the virtual server is configured with SNAT auto map. So, this connection is initiated from server-side VLAN self IP. This connection completes the TCP three-way handshake and TLS handshake. So far, the TLS connection is established between the server-side VLAN self IP and the selected pool member. Over the server-side TLS connection, the LTM forwards the HTTP request originally sent by the client. Now, the backend server receives and processes the request and return the response to the F5 server-side VLAN self IP. LTM server-side VLAN self IP receives the response from the backend server, and then it maps this response to the client-side virtual server IP, ensuring it goes to the correct client connection. Since the WAF policy is attached, the LTM forwards the web server response to the WAF before sending it to the client. So, the WAF does the security inspection for both the client request and the server response. Now, the WAF inspect the web server response and give the verdict to LTM. If the WAF verdict is allow, then the LTM returns the actual web server response to the client through the virtual server IP. If the WAF verdict is deny, then the LTM returns the WAF block page to the client through the virtual server IP. Key points to take away from this video. F5 functions as a full proxy, maintaining separate client-side and server-side connections. The web application firewall does the security inspection for both the client request and server response. If the WAF blocks the client request, then F5 returns a block page to the user and no connection is created to any backend server. The load balancer establishes a server-side connection only after the client request successfully passes the WAF inspection. The load balancer performs continuous health checks to monitor the availability and status of all the pool members. This concludes our chapter 4. I hope this video helped you to understand how F5 LTM operates as a full proxy, handling both load balancing and security. Continue with chapter 5 to learn about nodes, health monitors, pools and pool members. Also, check out bonus chapter 3 to see how to set up an F5 VM as a full reverse proxy. Thank you for watching.